Welcome to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Every week, I'll be sitting down with a sales executive where they'll share their stories and experiences that produce game-changing results. Let's be honest, sales can be a tough game. I'm sure at some point, we've all delivered a less than stellar demo, been ghosted by a client or two, and sometimes maybe we did more talking than listening. And that's where I can help. The stories and insights our guests share can be applied to your own business, your territory, or with your team, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Our weekly tactics and strategies help you get out of your head and start creating your own path towards game-changing results. So we're just talking about, before we hit record, Tom, a lot of, when you think about workplace harassment and conflict in the workplace, it really is a spectrum. And oftentimes people think if it's not physical, sexual abuse, then it's okay, it's acceptable. And I think, and maybe you can educate me here, is it's in the gray areas that people are questioning, is this reportable, or this makes me feel uncomfortable? What should I do? So maybe we could just start by defining, like, what is conflict in the workplace.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Karen. That's such a great question because it really identifies the issue of reporting and the issue of what is acceptable in a workplace. So I always look at it, and this is based on a lot of the legislation and some of the cases that have been investigated and in the province, but it's really based on the hearer or the listener, the recipient of communication. So most conflict is as a result of a failure in communication, whether it's the communicator, the person that's providing the information, or the hearer, the listener, um, receiving the information. There's a breakdown and there's perceptions that then take over. Now, we all have our own perceptions of things, and these are built from our past history and our experiences that we've had in our lives. And we anticipate when we hear things, we compartmentalize it. And I'm sure you've had experiences where, and everyone has had this, when someone is telling you something, you immediately go to what their intent is and what they're saying based on some experience that you've had in the past, either good or bad, when in fact you you stop actually listening to them because you're developing your own response to what you believe they're saying. And that's all part of an active listening piece, which is really important in your work, and it is obviously in other types of business as well. So the conflict really comes from a breakdown in communication, and then a perception that we develop that may or may not be the reality. So when we talk about workplace harassment or bullying, um, what we really have to concern ourselves with is the listener and what they're perceiving and what they're hearing, and um, that's really at the heart of it. It's not what the intent of the person that's saying the things is. It's how what is being said or done is picked up and perceived by the listener.
Interesting. So, and it kind of goes back to the importance of communication. But what I'm hearing there is also perception, because say we're in a boardroom and someone sets a statement, a question, a directive, and there's 4 or 5 of us, but we all interpret it as, or perceive it as, something different based on what you're saying as past experience, or we kind of box it into our own life experience or something that's happened before. And based on that, we could deem what they've just said as negative or positive. Meanwhile, the intention of the speaker was completely different.
100%. I'll give you an example. Um, there was a presentation being done in a boardroom, and the presenter was a motorcycle rider. And they were at the time describing the motorcycle that they had as being a Harley Davidson built in the United States. And they described that that was their fourth or fifth bike that they've owned in their life, and that previous bike that they had was a Japanese, I think it's a Honda, um, motorcycle. And if you could
Mm-hmm.
imagine, this person used that terminology all their life and felt that there was no issue with saying something like that. And there were people of different ethnic backgrounds in the classroom, and it was taken as an offensive comment. And the person that said it ha- was shocked. So, when we talk about perceptions and our lived experiences in our lives, sometimes I don't think this person that said it with any ill intent to, categorize any particular race of people, but it did came out that way, and it was heard that way, and it was addressed immediately, and they apologized, and they took responsibility for it, and I think that was fine. But that just gives you an example of how one person's perception of what they're saying is completely innocent, and what people are hearing is the opposite to that.
And that again, that kind of blows my mind that somebody would even say that. But it's where they're from and what they know. But the silver lining in that story, Tom, is that it was addressed immediately. Because what I see and what I've been privy to is it not to that extent where it's an obvious racial slur, but where there's an underlying, almost a bit of a passive aggressiveness that leads you believing, did they just insult me there, or did they, and that's even worse, I think, because then you start questioning yourself. But the thing that I see is people leave the room and they're like, did you hear what Tom just said? Like, he totally cut Mary up. And meanwhile, you're like, we all heard it, but why didn't anybody bring that up while in the room with Tom? And then we leave, and that contributes to a toxic culture. And so let's talk about that a little bit, about like why in that moment was it not addressed? Let's break that down for a moment. Say in a boardroom, something was said, whether directly or indirectly, made the person feel, or everyone had that. Well, where could we take that? If everyone's feeling that, safe to say there was intent there. So, why, in your experience, Tom, do people not stop there and address that person who said that?
And it's so common, just exactly what you described. Um, there are a number of reasons why, and there's an inherent fear. Now let's go back even further. There's a fear in some people of speaking up at all for any reason. You've done all kinds of training, and you know that percentage of people in the classroom that just sit back and they don't feel comfortable even asking a simple question. And as a speaker, you know that they're the ones that you want to try to engage so that everyone's um, engaged in the group. So you already have the initial fear of people speaking up about mundane things. So then add on the fact that they maybe hear something that the next piece is that they question whether it was what they think it is. An insulting comment. My example, as if I can use that, um, people may not realize that it was, a racial comment and could be offensive, and so they're questioning that. So we have the first piece that they're uncomfortable speaking. Then add to that questioning whether it is a problem, and I want to go back to really what the definition and in some of the definitions, and not the legal definition of harassment, a course of vexatious comment or contact that is known to be unwelcome. But uh, anything that's really making you feel uncomfortable should be addressed, and it should be talked about. And there may be some reasons why the listener um, shouldn't feel that way. But in most cases, if you're feeling uncomfortable about what something is being said, it should be addressed. So the reasons why it's not being addressed are numerous. And the first two examples of people being afraid of speaking up and then not knowing whether they should speak up. But then there's also those internal types of things that go on within an organization. There's power imbalances. Maybe the person who made the comment is a supervisor or a manager, so that adds another layer of, geez, do I want to say anything to the boss about that? That may affect my career. Maybe there's some personal history between the two people, or even going back to the person, the listener, maybe they've got some internal issues, perceptions. They grew up in a domineering household, and comments that were made that you and I may think are totally inappropriate. They just say, "Well, that's just how I grew up." Um, and of course, there's that old saying that everyone who's who's been in the workforce for any period of time at all has probably heard, when someone will say, "Oh, that's just Bill. That's just the way he is," and kind of writing it
Mm-hmm.
off that way. The other um, things that keep people from speaking up is how confident they feel in the workplace. Uh, have they seen the organization take that type of thing seriously? Has there been some sort of re- uh, punishment or discipline levied on people that have done things that are inappropriate? And conversely, have people that have brought it forward been rewarded? Or have they been chastised and retaliated against? Um, those are, just some of the examples of really why people tolerate this inappropriate behavior and let it go on. And if I may add as
Mm-hmm.
well, in my experience in workplace investigation and workplace conflict mediation, uh, invariably the majority of the cases that I've investigated have and mediated have been as a result of unresolved conflict from years ago. And so when it isn't dealt with initially, you can guarantee that somewhere down the line there will be either a harassment complaint that will need to be investigated. There will be all those issues that happen to people that are experiencing this type of thing, um, with you know sick leave, and their productivity goes down, etc. So the importance of addressing it immediately, the importance of organizing organizations supporting people who um, want to come forward and maybe afraid of coming forward, and then also for organizations to uh, uh, really develop a program that shows people it's better to come forward than to keep it to yourself.
Yeah, all really great points. And the one that stood out for me is when it's someone of leadership, and you're just thinking, "Am I little me, say in my environment, a sales rep, junior, are they going to call out their boss in front of everybody? Whether they were spoken to that way or whether they are the bystander, probably not, right? And they're thinking, well, you know what, I'm new, and even if I'm not new, I'm inexperienced. This is a leadership team, and what is this going to do for my promotion, for my potential career? But it just continues to add to the toxicity of the culture. And so, what I like what you said is, how can we reward those who do stick their neck out? And again, in a diplomatic and a tactful way. But I would say, when you said, address it immediately, that's key. In that moment, how can we, you know, voice our concerns, whether it's we are part of the same race, whether it's a gender thing. But if you've offended that person, chances are you've offended three or four other people in the room.
And that really takes leadership within the organization, and not necessarily a formal leader, but even a supervisor or someone that's been in the organization for an extended period of time that has some tenure there. um, they could potentially bring it forward as well if the person that's uncomfortable, the person that heard the comment felt uncomfortable. If they could go to someone else within the organization to bring it forward, if they don't feel comfortable, that's one of the alternatives. You want Everyone wants to work in an organization where no one's walking on eggshells and feeling sick to their stomach if they have to see someone that they are having conflict with. But that's the reality, and conflict is part of everyday work life. It's part of life. People who say, I avoid conflict, I try to avoid conflict, well, they're not necessarily living in the real world, because you cannot avoid it. So you just need to know how to deal with it. And some conflict, there's been lots of books written on this. Some conflict can be positive, and I say that in the way that the way that it's handled. Because if you and I are having a disagreement about something, it can be very positive if we collaborate on a solution that suits both of us.
Mm-hmm.
If you know, there's that chart that identifies how people deal with conflict, and the bottom left-hand corner is the avoidance one. Well, I just, I don't want to deal with that. That's just the way Bill is. I'm using Bill as an example. This is just the way he is, so don't worry about it. That's the avoiding piece, and that's just fraught with problems in the future. And you want to get up to the collaboration in the top right hand quadrant. But the other two areas are um, no, it's my way. I've got more time on than you, Karen. That's the way it's going to be. And you acquiesce to that. Okay, yeah, you're the boss. And then the other way is to the other quadrant is when you say, okay, well, this time I'll let you get away with it, but next time we'll do it my way. So there is sort of a give and take there, but in every case, one side loses. So in conflict mediation, we have speak about anyone that goes through mediation that successfully goes through mediation. It's a win-win situation because both parties uh, are available there in a safe, confidential location to express how they feel, and then to hear how the other party feels and the reasons why they said or did whatever they did, and then they can work together to come up with how can we keep this from happening in the future, because all of this work is about future focus. Whatever happened has happened, we can't change that, but how can we prevent it from happening in the future? How can we work together on that? So that collaborative piece at the end of the day, when I talk about there is some good conflict, is it creates an opportunity for people to collaborate on a reasonable way and solution for them to work together in the future. So that's why
Mm-hmm.
it can be a positive thing.
I think conflict definitely. I mean, we don't want to be surrounded with yes people all the time, right? And I think as long as it's respectful, and it's kind of where the studies show a diverse team outperforms a non-diverse team. But I just feel it's we can say these things, but it's are we demonstrating, are we modeling them? So when we have our employee handbook or whatever we're following, and then we're in a boardroom and you're talking about creating a safe space, but are we actually doing that, or is it just fill out this form and then knowing that form goes nowhere, nothing gets happened? And so what I think now with this great resignation and everything going on, people are not just evaluating places of employment for the dollars, they're looking at the culture big time. And am I going to be, they want to be part of something bigger, a community. What does this stand for? And if I can even get a whiff of that before I come in, I am not even entering the door. So I think any organization trying to attract good talent loses their competitive edge because of that right there.
100%. And you're describing leadership, and it doesn't have to be this. Sorry, it doesn't have to be the CEO of the organization. It can be a frontline supervisor expressing, the old school open door policy. Um, there's some good and bad with that, but the good part of that is I want you to feel free and safe to be able to express yourself, even if you disagree with something that I have put forward. I remember Chris Lewis, retired commissioner of the OPP, would say, "Listen, come and tell me if you have a problem with some of my decisions. I need to hear that feedback." Now, I'm not saying you will get your way, because
Mm-hmm.
I have to make decisions that are the best for the whole organization, not just for an individual. But you could possibly get your way, but I won't know if you don't come forward. So I really like that
Yeah.
idea. And there's another great leader, Angelo Caravaggio from the military, retired, I think, as a lieutenant colonel, and he teaches leadership. And he said, I had an open door policy, but I also had some provisos with that. And for any of the military folk that had an idea or had a problem with one of my decisions, they were more than welcome to come in and talk to me about it. But also, when you do that, bring me an alternative solution, and bring me the legislative authority that will allow me to adopt that solution. So
Mm-hmm.
that those were some pretty good takeaways for me as well, because I asked him then. I said, "Well, tell me then, of all the people that came in your door, how many times did you change your mind and adopt their solution?" And he said 90%. And
Mm.
and I said, "Well, we both talked about that afterwards, and we thought, wow, what a great place to work, when you know that if you do have a problem and you come, you don't just complain about a particular situation, but you actually have a solution, and you have, as he said, the authority that you would give him to make that decision, and you walked out with your way now, something changed the way you want it to be. How would you feel? You'd feel fantastic, empowered, all
Yeah.
those real good things that we want our people to within an organization to feel.
Yeah, and what that example there, Tom, shows me that they showed them the path, or they gave them the process, and the other examples didn't. So it's like, oh, do this, or we encourage that. But here, and that was one of my first learnings in corporate at a very young age, is that if I'm going to voice a complaint, or not even a complaint, that I don't agree with something, I'm definitely going to bring a solution to the board. I'm just not going to, slam this without bringing some solution. But then he took it a step further and said, "This is what, if you want this implemented, this is what you need to do." So basically, do some work and look at that 90% adoption rate. So it just, if leaders could kind of show the how or the process to execution, I feel that that might be a little bit of the missing part, just based on that experience, that example you shared.
So, just another way to do this is, in my workplace restoration work. This is the things that I do to particular workplaces that have suffered a workplace investigation so disruptive. The investigators come in, they interview witnesses, both for the respondent and witnesses against the respondent that are supporting the complainant, etc. And then, or workplace mediation, where there's been issues that affect a number of people, but it's really involving two individuals, and those are the two people that I mediate with. But what about all the ancillary issues that occur, and the problems that people have? So that's where the workplace restoration work comes in. And in my discussions with small working units within the police department. This is primarily where I've specialized my work in. In work units, there's usually a supervisor involved. Uh, I will suggest to the supervisor that they hold regular staff meetings and have an agenda and have some standing items on it. But I also really stress this part, and this most important part of a staff meeting is you go through the status of sales or whatever type of work you're in. You go to do the roundtable. How's this project going? How's that project going, etc. And then give yourself 10 minutes at the very end and do this. I don't know if you could see this, but close your book
Mm-hmm.
and set it down and say, okay, how's everybody doing? And start to break down that I'm the boss. You'll do what I tell you to do, and you'll have things done when I ask you, when I expect them to be done, and start to break that down to be more human. And it's very difficult for some people. And it's also very difficult for the people to hear the boss say, "So how's it going?" They hesitate. So what I recommend for them to do for the first couple of meetings is for these supervisors to take the lead and say, "Okay, how's everybody doing? Well, wait, let me tell you how I'm doing." You know, I, and then to be very honest, I'm having a real problem with this COVID thing. Like, I have homeschooling. I'm so stressed out. I have elderly parents, and I'm worried about whatever it is. Expose that little piece, and I'll tell you, within the law enforcement community, very difficult. They're nervous
Mm-hmm.
about showing any sort of humanity, but as soon as they do, and others do, it bonds that team. uh, you know the old analogies of show a weakness to your team, show them that you're not infallible. um,
Mm-hmm.
Describe that you had a problem once and didn't know how to deal with it, and you got into trouble over it. That people are so afraid of doing that, but that's really strength. That's not weakness, that's strength. And that shows that everyone can make a mistake and you're not going to be hung at dawn because of it. You're, people will understand that. And um, it really helps to break down. And then the core and the key to that piece is that starts to open up the lines of communication. Then people start feeling more confident to be able to say, I was at a presentation yesterday and someone said something and it really bothered me. I didn't feel comfortable talking about it then, but now I am. And now the supervisor is hearing this and, oh, well, tell me about that. Well, yeah, we can't have that. Do you want to come with me and we'll address it, or do you want me to address it for you? So at least um, you're opening up the lines of communication there. And I really recommend that to any supervisor that has a team to hold these staff meetings regularly. And the last part of that I'll just describe is that if I'm new to the team or if I'm kind of introverted and I'm uncomfortable, I know that I may not come to you today about a problem, but if you're holding a regular staff meeting next Tuesday, I know that that's an opportunity for me to talk about it. And
Mhm.
and if I don't feel comfortable then, I know that next Tuesday is another opportunity. So it's really powerful. And it's this very simple thing.
Well, that's the consistency piece. And when you're as you were talking, I was just writing that word down, consistency and regular. So when you're ready, I'm creating a safe space. I'm guessing no one's going to jump on the first round, but knowing that 2, 3, 4, and just what I'm hearing is even the more we start talking about it, even if it's not the first time, we're hearing it out loud. And so say an event happened yesterday and I'm talking about it at my staff meeting on Friday. I'm still airing it, but what I'm hearing is as long as these regular meetings are taking place, the gap in between when it happened and when I voice, we can shrink it so that in time we might be actually able to say something in the moment, whether it's us or we are in the environment where it's happening to somebody else because we are comfortable talking about it. We're also seeing the benefits of what come out of it from talking about it. Because often we're like, I don't trust the system. I don't trust and that was me. Sometimes they're like, well, write your thing here. I'm like, well, I know who's reviewing this. I know this is going to go nowhere and I'm just not going to do it. So I think when we can build that culture and that habit, but also show them that this is what comes out of it so that they feel you don't tell them they feel it firsthand themselves, so that's going to train them, and then it's going to through osmosis it's going to hopefully have an effect on their peers.
It's so important. And the comments that you're making there about the culture and the trust. Um, you may not, as a supervisor, frontline, um, in my old world, a sergeant, a shift sergeant, you may not have the ability or the authority to um, levy any sort of discipline or whatever. But an organization itself needs to develop the trust by showing the whole organization that they take things like harassment very
Mm-hmm.
seriously. They can say it all day long. Oh, yeah, we have a harassment policy and we have a program and our joint health and safety committee, they're all over it. They've all had the training and everything. They could talk about that all day long. But until um, people are held accountable for harassing others, for being bullies, until that is seen to be by others, then it's paper tiger. It's not worth the paper that it's written on. So organizations, the CEOs, the chief administrative officers, the chief operational officers, they have a real duty here to show that they take uh, this policy seriously. It's legislated. There's been lots of examples where organizations have failed to take their harassment policies seriously, and they've been fined through human rights tribunals, etc. They've been fined for failing to do that. So there's legislation that requires it, but more importantly, it really gives the employees, the workers, the people that are doing the work, that confidence that it is taken seriously and something will be done, and I won't be retaliated against for coming forward. That's a very common theme out there. The reason why I didn't come
Mm-hmm.
forward is I'm going to, they're going to, it's like painting a target on my back.
Yeah.
And so organizations at the highest level really need to understand that and to reward those who come forward, as I said, and to punish those who, firstly, have harassed the victim or have retaliated against them for coming forward. That's
Mm-hmm.
another huge piece as well.
Well, one piece that stood out to me, I remember working with a company and somebody was having some mental health struggles with the pandemic where, I would say most people, almost everybody did in their own way. And I said, "Well, are you going to, are you going to voice a complaint? Are you going to, say something, bring this forward?" "Oh no, I'll have a stigma on my back. I'll never get promoted and I'm just going to be unstable." And I was so sad to hear that because I thought it might not even be this organization. It might be that this is the thought of most people, that it's weak. I'm not going to be considered for further promotion and that I can't handle pressure and stress. And I'm just like, this is not weak. This is strength to do this. It's the complete opposite for you to raise your hand and say, "I'm not okay here. I'm not okay."
Yeah, and they need examples. Um, those individuals, they can't be forced to come forward, obviously, and they live in their own hell afterwards. So they need to see examples of others coming forward and not being and being promoted afterwards, not being um, retaliated against by the organization before they may come forward as well. So once you get a couple of people that are prepared to do that, um, I think you can change the whole culture in an organization. And it does take a little bit of time. I get that, but uh, every step forward is a positive step.
Yeah. And it goes back. I've always said, Tom, model the behavior in anything we do, especially for leaders. And it's just, that's exactly what it is, that show, instead of just saying, I have an open door policy or, challenge people in a meeting, show that you're challenging this person instead of just saying it. And I feel that that's what's not happening. We're compliant and we're checking a box. But when someone says something and I've told my whole team to do this and I myself am not doing it, you know what? I need to shine that mirror on me a little bit harder, because it's giving that knowing doing gap. It's widening it. And so we're telling them to do it, but yet we're not doing it ourselves. And so I totally believe that we have to disarm, we have to lean into our vulnerability and show them what it looks like and celebrate that and get rid of, and start making changes, that this is no longer acceptable. That's creating the culture. It starts shifting things out that shouldn't be out, and then people are like, "Okay, I see how this is working," because in the absence of that, it's all gray. We need to start creating boundaries and barriers that says this. If there's a gray zone, that shows me that there's a lack of distinct culture and boundaries. It should be like, that's a yes or no, that we can or cannot do that. And I think that's where leadership is failing, in that they're leaving this ambiguous environment up to their team, and they're like, "Well, I really don't know if that's wrong." Well, you should know if it is or if it isn't.
Yeah, uh, great points. And you made me think of the bullies in the organizations are only bullies because they've allowed to get away with it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they know the CEO personally. They go golfing with them or whatever. Some examples, personal examples I've had in the past. But and that's why there's been no punishment done there. And I think what happens is not only do the employees and the workers get empowered when something positive happens, but it's a real wake up call for those people who bully because they think that's what they have to do to get ahead, or that's how
Yeah.
they show strength. As you said, it's the opposite of
Mm-hmm.
strength. It's a true weakness because the bullies are making up for something inherently that they're missing inside. That
Mm-hmm.
they feel that the only way that they can get anyone to do something for them is if they're tough and crack the whip or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So what that does when an organization stops that train that they're on, and doesn't necessarily make an example of anyone, but treats people who come forward with the respect that they deserve, and then divvies out whatever discipline is required on the people that have committed this particular harassment. It sends a message to both sides that
Mm-hmm.
please come forward, we will take you seriously, and it won't blemish your record. And anyone that's thinking about acting the way that particular person did, you better think twice, because you'll be um, identified, and there will be sanctions levied up to and including dismissal.
Mm-hmm. So fear on that side, but not fear
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
leadership side.
yeah. That's
Fe-
great. It's a great analogy. The fear should be redirected.
yes.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah, definitely. Just what you were saying about bullies and punishing them. What also it made me think about is, as you said, if they're golfing or whatever, they're insulating that upper layer. And what it also does is it keeps the bullies up there, and it also prevents advancement because they're insulated. So I don't, and now I'm going to throw a gender card in here. But in my experience, and I'm not saying women are not bullies, definitely, but sometimes there's men up top and they're buddies, and there might be a little bit of bullying, or not even bullying, but just lack of awareness, of acknowledgement of those beneath them. And so because that relationship is strong, they've kind of marked their spot in the territory, or in that level. And so anyone else who has the right skill set, who has servant leadership, who's leading with vulnerability, all the innovation and that's not even considered because of this bravado up top. And so I'm tying this back to women in sales, and it's coming up to International Women's Day, and these women are kept on a level. Not sometimes it's because we don't put our hand up, and I'll take that. But oftentimes there's no spots up there because these bullies or these people who aren't willing to consider us at an equal playing field are not creating the space for us to go there.
And I come from a law enforcement background, Karen. So I've seen the old boys clubs and the male dominated culture. And thank God it's changing, and it can't change fast enough. So you're exactly right that there is inherently traditional old school cultures that impair the ability for people to move up and to express their displeasure with something that they heard or saw. Um, and that's just what we were talking about, is to change that mindset, to change that culture, to show that they're taking things seriously by actually by action rather than just words and presentations and seminars, and to give and empower the people to come forward and to discipline those that are um, breaching the legislation, or being a bully. The Canadian Centre of Occupational Health and Safety, CCOHS, is a great source for anyone that's looking for examples of bullying. It's not really defined in our
Mm-hmm.
legislation per se. Harassment is, and bullying is a part of it that gives rise to the harassment really offense. But there's really good examples they have. I'll just share a few things here. Excluding or isolating someone socially. Like, how often does that happen? Like, oh, I'm sorry, I missed you. I missed you inviting you to that meeting. Well, like, is that a bullying? Maybe in isolation on its own, maybe not, but in concert with, as a friend of mine used to describe, it's a constellation of things. If there's a number of different things that are happening, intimidating a person, obviously, but undermining or deliberately impeding a person's work, didn't give you all the information you needed to do something, didn't provide training in
Mm-hmm.
Excel, as an example, and we use Excel all the time, and we just expected you to know it, or you have to learn it on your own. Is that undermining or deliberately impeding you to do your work? It could possibly be. So people really have to expand their vision of what bullying is in the workplace, and this is a great source for anyone just to have a look and to review.
And I think, Tom, this is my gut, is that if I'm considering or contemplating bringing something forward or that doesn't feel right, the fact that I'm asking myself that question probably answers it's not right.
100%. And so what if you bring it forward and it's not really deemed to be bullying? In my
Mm-hmm.
past example there about the motorcycle, that person had no idea. I truly believe that they had no idea that they're living obviously under in a rock or under a rock or a cave, but they really didn't, and they immediately apologized.
Mm-hmm.
I was advised that they immediately apologized and swore that they would never do it again, and they wanted to shovel the person's driveway for the next winter, as to apologize for it. But no, they took it seriously, and that's what we want.
Mm-hmm.
These bullies may not know what they're doing is they know what they're doing, but they may not know the impact that they're having. And if that is brought to light, and they get to change, and I'll just end it by saying that in my mediations, my conflict mediations, the most important parts come when someone acknowledges what they did had an impact on the others, and in some cases apologize. I have seen the transformation in two people that haven't talked for 3 years in one example, and the one person apologized to the other and they said, I had no idea you were going through that. I'm so sorry. If I had have known, I never would have. I certainly didn't want you to go through what you were going through. Thank you for telling me. I sit back as a mediator and I watch the transformation, and it's so powerful. And I think they're going to go off now and have a totally different relationship at work,
Mm-hmm.
that because it's future focused. Can't help what happened in the past. Think about
Yeah.
how are we going to work together in the future.
Yeah. What a great story. And oftentimes, in that instance they weren't aware, but sometimes it's ego, right? And it's like I'm not willing to swallow my pride, and so when you can resolve something in 3 years, but that's fantastic. But what I see is people just want to be heard. They want to be validated, and they want to know that they matter. And a lot of times people rush to the solution mode, and it's like, can you just acknowledge my feelings first? Because I don't care if you're going to do this. I need to know that what I've said, actually you've taken it in. You've taken this. I'm a person. These are feelings.
People want to be heard and understood. And there's an old saying about getting gotten. People want to get gotten. I love that terminology, but yeah, I really get you. I get you. And if someone says that to me, I really get what you're saying there. It really speaks to me. But we've developed that bond for the future. And in your sales work, if you, I can only assume this because I'm not in that business, but if you can get to the person on that level where you get each other, and as a salesperson talking to a potential client, and the client feels that they've been gotten, I think you're well on your way to a positive outcome.
Yeah, that's huge, and it is, and I think that's just in life. I mean, definitely in sales too, but it shows. And this is where I want to go next, where we're going to end on this. But that's just getting them to a level where they are understood, and that a lot of that's active listening. And I would say too many salespeople are going in with their own agendas, and they're not waiting or giving the exchange or time to allow them to get gotten, right? Because it takes time, it takes asking questions, it takes empathy, storytell, all these things. But the minute that's when you can help them. Before then, you cannot help them, because that's your perception or your bias taking over, or your desire, your commission breath. But when you're getting them and they know it and they feel it and they let go and they surrender, because they know that they're gotten and they're in good hands, and it's almost like an imaginary baton, and they're passing it and they're like, now you go.
That's great. What a great analogy! Like the baton passing. That makes so much sense. Which means
Yeah.
I'm actually listening to you. You know,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we
well,
don't get
it's
listened
rare
to.
that no.
Yeah.
I want to end here on having difficult conversations, whether this is, a manager, it doesn't really matter who it is, but can you walk through kind of some de-escalation tactics to diffuse things and really, as we said, as you mentioned, future focus? a lot of people, and what I see too is a lot of people who were perhaps the sales reps were promoted to a manager, and so they're new in the role, and all of a sudden we went to being buddies to now I gotta perhaps discipline you. That's one example. Or just in general, what are some tactics that people can do, that sales managers or leaders can do, to kind of diffuse, de-escalate, bring it down so that we can move forward and we can get to that future focus mode?
Okay. Yeah, and there's so many different variables involved here. If it's a supervisor speaking to an employee about a potential performance issue, or if it's more serious and someone is really upset. So
Mm-hmm.
I always start this off by saying, make sure you are physically safe. Number one priority, because you can't operate if you are nervous about potentially being assaulted. So set yourself up in a way that you are physically safe. You know where the door is if you have to escape. It's just um, some of those techniques, like being aware of your surroundings. Where am I? How can I get out if I have to? So, and that can take just a few seconds. It doesn't derail anything, but just make sure that piece is addressed. The next piece, obviously, is just to stay calm. When people are upset, they will try to there's obviously the red brain and the blue brain analogy. And the red brain is our old fight, flight, or freeze, and the blue brain is more of our analytical, more cultured, newer side. You want to get people into that side of their brain, into that analytical piece. So when they're in the red side of their brain, they're yelling, they're upset, they're firstly, don't take anything personal, whatever they're saying. It's their opinions. They oh, you were in a half an hour late. Do you treat all your clients like that? Okay, whatever happened. That's personal. That's them feeling upset. You don't have to take that on. Staying calm, and then um, obviously the staying calm piece also is in your body language. So you don't want to be standing. I used to joke in my body language presentations about workplace and personal safety is, you don't want to talk to someone like this. Hi, Karen. Hi, how you doing? You don't want to be in a defensive mode, but you can be in I can hold my hands like this and talk to you, and now I'm still protecting myself, but this is certainly doesn't appear to be aggressive at all. So
Mm-hmm.
maintain that neutral body position, because people pick up on unsaid things even more than what we say. And then you want to start to practice being empathetic, putting yourself in their shoes. And then the key to switching them from the fight, flight, or freeze to the analytical piece is to ask questions. And I know we've had these conversations about, you're such a proponent of asking important questions, asking probing questions, getting them um, off that position that they hold into what their interests are. And the only way you can do that is by asking them, what would you like to see happen? How could we get you what you want? Those types of things. Almost immediately, Gary Furlong's got a great book out on this, on asking these probing questions. Immediately, they switch into, oh yeah, well, okay, well, this is what I want, from yelling and screaming, because it takes them, what? I'm being asked a question. I have to think for a second to tell you what I want. Shifts them right out of the fight, flight, or freeze.
So what's the shift there? Is it that the focus is on the future state, the focus is on them, or you've just switched? Like what caused that shift?
Uh, well, he may have a different analogy of it, but in my mind, it's uh, my position is, you did me wrong, and now I'm being asked a question, and I'm maintaining that, and I'm hammering. I'm trying to think up ways to tell you how wrong you are, and then
Mm-hmm.
you ask me a question about what would I like to see. I have to I take a stutter step, because you're making me go, well, wait, what would I like? Well, this is the reason why I'm here is because I need new windows. And all of us, I've stopped saying, you didn't show up when you said you wanted to. Well, what do you want happen? Well, I need new windows. Like, I've actually
Mm-hmm.
switched from this to this. uh, in my mind, I think I'm switching my brain side. So I don't know how that happens or why, but it's just a physical and probably a psychological uh, shift that people automatically make.
Hmm. It feels like it went from, I'm not on your side to I am on your side. And we're kind of moving into that resolution mode. And how can we, what would you say? What would you like to see happen? So you're now driving it, but your audience member is supporting that. So it's like, how can we come together? But you are the focus here.
And that's so great. You're the focus because what you've done is they're upset because they're out of control. You were
Yeah.
late. You didn't show up on time. You said you'd be here at 5. I didn't have control over that. I'm out of control because you were supposed to be here at 5. I had everything planned. So when I use the term, what would you like to see happen? I'm giving them their control back
Yeah.
immediately. Oh, well, I would like you to apologize and then we can move on. I'm really sorry.
Hmm.
I apologize. All right then. We gave them their control back, and that's the part that they were missing when they're upset.
Yeah, a lot of that just reminds me of Chris Voss's book is The Power, when we lose power. And his example was when his kids ask him something, he says no right away because it shows that then he can actually consider what it is they thought, but it kind of buys them time and shows them he's got the power. But then he can go, so what was it that you actually wanted to do? So it just, brings the control back, but in an indirect way.
Yeah, yes, and that's really at the core. I think a lot of the books are on conflict and lack of communication is people's feeling out of control, and the reason why they escalate is they need to have some sort of control back in their life. And if you can give them a little
Hmm.
bit, remember my work with domestic violence victims, all their lives they've been out of control. They have had no control over their life. They've been told where to be and when, and to have supper made at a particular time and who they can see and who they can't. And when we go in as police officers, we want to we want to give them some control back by saying, would what would you like to do? Is there someone that you could call to come and sit with you while we go through this process? And giving them that little bit of control back is, in some cases, it's foreign to them, but it really helps them start to feel better about themselves.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's the turning point, and I would imagine after years of that, is that they don't know what to do. They don't know how to make a decision because it's been removed from them. And I can see that parallel in corporate. And this is where leaders that give their team the answers versus leaders that empower their team by asking them questions and increasing their self awareness. Then they do have that. They might initially go, well, I don't actually know what I would do because you've held my hand for the last 5 years, but all of a sudden you've given me space. Wow, let me just see what my capability here, my confidence is. And then just like the consistency and the regularity over time, I'm going to know what to do.
One last thing, which is seems sort of small, but I think is pretty powerful, is to allow silence. We
Mm,
want to fill the gap. It's uncomfortable. No one's talking. Well, I have to say something.
yeah.
If you could train
Yeah.
yourself not to, Voss, I think, he'll do this in his interrogation or in interviewing. And certainly we used it all the time in interviewing and police suspects is to bite your tongue,
Mm,
allow that time, that space, and don't fill it yourself. Let them fill it. They'll feel uncomfortable, and trust me, they will fill it. But that starts the communication. What would you like to see happen?
hmm. Oh, I love that. I am all about the pause and the silence, especially in negotiations and anything. And I think salespeople, especially junior salespeople, it's uncomfortable initially for anybody, but lean into that discomfort. I love what you just said, bite your tongue. I put myself on mute. So it takes me that 3 or 4 seconds to get there, but they will fill it. They 100% would fill it. And in sales, this is a bit off topic, but as soon as somebody drops the price and they immediately start talking about, well, like maybe we'll discount, and you're like, what? Bite your tongue. You didn't need to go there. So pausing, I'm so glad you brought that up. It's huge. Embrace the silence because sometimes again, we just need to hear what you just told me. Holy cow, this is the first time. I can't believe my team is doing this. Or I actually need that. That's a great solution. Let me just like ponder for a moment how we could put that into place. So it's just let's just let it simmer and be okay with that.
We get so much input all the time. We don't have time to process.
Yeah.
And it's just giving everyone time to process and think and breathe.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Human beings versus human doings. Thank you so much for your insights. Yeah, I think, when we look at, we talked about a lot of things from communication, our perception about it, how to create a safe space, disarming and leaning into your vulnerability as leaders, and really, the unspoken word, but there's a lot of people watching. So if we're not doing the right thing to the individual, there's a lot of people on the sidelines that may be brushing up their resume as a result and saying, this is not the type of organization or the culture that I want to be part of. So a lot of eyes on us now more than ever before. Tom, if people want to learn more about you or Blue Mediation, where can they find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, Tom Gerling, and I also have a website, bluemediation.com. So I specialize in law enforcement, but I'm willing to work with any organization or any group. I've done lots of work with uh, hospitals, etc., and healthcare, and also with law enforcement. But I'm bluemediation.com, and I think there's a contact page in there if you want to get in touch with me.
Okay, well, we'll have all that in our show notes. So again, thank you so much, Tom, for your time and your insights today.
Great, Karen. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, and a great time. Thank you.
My pleasure.